Hello and welcome to Great Western. In this edition we will be talking about the classic TV comedy drama Minder. Minder was created by Thames Television and shown on the ITV network in the UK between 1979 and 1994. The Minder is a central character, particularly in the early shows. The Minder is Terry McCann, played by Dennis Waterman. And a Minder means someone who protects a businessman or criminal. And in this case, Terry McCann protects dodgy business dealer Arthur Daley, who is played by George Cole. Criminal is the operative word, as the show is about small-time criminals in West London. Terry himself has done prison time some years before the first episode, and a lot of the plots involve Terry trying to keep his good reputation and avoid going back inside because of Arthur's schemes. Because the criminality is usually minor, the show operates as a comedy. No one dies violently, and weapons are highly unusual, certainly for Terry and Arthur. Throughout the 1980s, it was a big show in ITV's schedule, and Arthur Daley became a national icon. In 1989, Dennis Waterman left the show, and a replacement Minder was found in the shape of Arthur's nephew, Ray Daley. The show continued as a popular draw for several more years, but was judged to have finally run out of steam and ITV's budget by 1994. The show is set very specifically in West London, and West London locations form an important part of the show's identity, although other London landmarks and districts do appear from time to time. The base for the show is the Winchester Club, run by Dave, a friend of Arthur and Terry. In one episode, the club is accurately described by a visitor as a place where minor criminals drink. Another base of operations is Terry's flat, which seems to change locations with each series, suggesting Terry's rather itinerant lifestyle. This personal space is often invaded by Arthur and used as a dumping ground for Arthur's dodgy merchandise, or sometimes Arthur's old friends. This forms a useful metaphor for Arthur's relationship to Terry. Although Arthur helped Terry when he came out of prison in the early 1970s, he is not a selfless parental figure at all, but a selfish individual who is prepared to rip off his friends if necessary. Dave the barman does not appear in every show, but he's an important character, and the only other character apart from Arthur who survived the show's revamp in 1991. Such was his popularity. Minder shows London warts and all. It isn't often glamorous, but this was all part of the show's charm. A downtrodden corner shop under attack from thugs, dodgy lockups down by the river full of stolen or unsellable goods, and minor criminals making threats, surrounded by their own minders, and good old-fashioned rip-offs, pure and simple. The show was created by writer Leon Griffiths, and he wrote several of the episodes until the late 1980s. Griffiths was inspired by stories and characters he met in London drinking clubs. A team of writers supported Griffiths, but his scripts are notable for their mixture of toughness and humour. If you Google some of the Leon Griffiths episodes, you're unlikely to be disappointed if you're able to watch one. Other writers sometimes took Minder in more esoteric directions, but Leon always kept to tough and streetwise, no doubt understanding his creation more than anyone else. Another core theme of the show is multiculturalism. The opening episode, Shootout at the OK Laundrette, begins with a London Italian wedding. And a central character of the episode is Stretch, a black man holding the laundrette to ransom. All through the show, from 1979 to 1994, we see Afro-Caribbeans, Greeks, Jews, Cypriots, Italians, and many other nationalities living side by side in London. There are no stereotypes in Minder. Black, white, whatever their colour, some are good and some are bad. And often in Minder, they're mainly bad. Leon Griffiths and his show Minder were ahead of the time on this multiculturalism issue. And as I'm sure you're aware, this is an issue that is still widely discussed today. Terry McCann is the lovable leading character and was played by Dennis Waterman for a decade until 1989. Terry's a bit of a drifter, but he's determined to put his criminal life behind him. By working for Arthur, out of some sense of loyalty and gratitude for his help in getting his life back on track when he came out of prison, Terry also inhabits a restless and unsettled world, a world of irregular wages, cash in hand of course, and ever-changing flats and cars. Terry seems to like this lifestyle, although he often threatens to quit working for Arthur and get a proper job. In earlier series, Terry has one or two steady girlfriends, and a fairly regular undercurrent of the show is the female preoccupation with Terry's future. Will he leave Arthur and get a proper job and some stability? Terry is a bit of a rough diamond, but he has a heart of gold, and he is magnetic to the ladies, until they realise that he is unlikely to settle down. Some of the best scenes from the Terry series era are the fight scenes. Terry is genuinely tough, having been a semi-professional boxer. Terry is the moral compass of Minder. He is proof that some criminals are genuinely repentant and don't want to go back to old ways. He is very generous with his time and money and loyal to a fault. He is often helping out old girlfriends and making a good father figure to their children. While Arthur is greedy and cowardly, Terry is the heart of the show, always ready to give someone down on his luck his last fiver. Arthur Daley was brilliantly played by George Cole, and his character became something of a national institution in the 1980s and 90s in the United Kingdom. There is no doubt that Arthur is selfish, cowardly, and greedy. He has few redeeming features, but he does display a lot of loyalty to Terry, whom he helped when Terry came out of prison. Because Terry has few family members mentioned in the show, Arthur is almost a stepfather. We should recognise that Arthur's loyalty to Terry is fairly selfish. Arthur knows that Terry is a very tough pair of hands, hard-working, and can be manipulated quite easily, especially when appealing to Terry's caring instincts. Arthur's rise to fame caused some problems on the show. Dennis Waterman felt that Arthur's character eclipsed his own as the 1980s went on. And it is true that many Minder plots from those years often revolve around silly schemes that Arthur has invented. To my mind, the show was getting formulaic at this point, but it did recover. It is debatable whether or not the character of Arthur was instrumental in Dennis leaving the show in 1989. Although Dennis also said that he felt a bit old for the role. But there is no doubt that had Arthur remained a relatively quiet character, the show would have ended at this point. But it didn't. Famously, Arthur is married to the forbidding Dawes, his unseen wife who keeps Arthur under control. It is credit to Leon Griffiths, Minder's creator, who must have surely invented Dawes, that this unseen and largely unknown character became almost as famous as Arthur himself, another national institution. One of the most unusual aspects of Minder is the supporting cast. Apart from a handful of characters, there isn't one. Instead, the drama uses the manor, which is the area where the show is set, and that's approximately Willesden, Fulham and Shepherd's Bush, to bring forth a cast of ever-changing characters. This moved the show away from straight situation comedy into the realms of something bigger, where each week's characters drove the plot and humour. Often the characters were played by well-known UK actors, such as Brian Blessed, Billy Connolly and Ray Kinnear, pictured here. And by the end of the 1980s, it was almost a competition to get a part on Minder. Two of the biggest stars of the time, Paul Eddington and Richard Briers, had big roles in 1988. And yet, as with the Morning Mist, all of these characters were gone by the next episode, never to be mentioned again. This revolving cast of characters kept Minder fresh, but also felt unrealistic. How many old friends and acquaintances could Terry and Arthur bump into in such a small area, each one seemingly well known to them? There is little doubt, though, that by keeping the supporting cast fresh and funny before they could get old, less was more in Minder. The police in Minder are semi-regular characters who do not appear in every episode. Again, had the two regular detectives appeared in every episode, Minder may well have taken on the burden of becoming a regular situation comedy. The police are strictly in the show for laughs. They're the bad guys, but they're not really that bad. Detective Sergeants Rycott and Chisholm are cynical and world-weary, and both of them are determined to put Arthur Daley in prison. Despite being stalwarts of the Terry years, Patrick Malahide, who played Chisholm, moved on in 1988, and sadly Peter Childs, who played Rycott, died very young in 1989. This meant that neither character made it to the rebooted Ray Daley years. Despite being objects of humour, the police usually have some very funny lines, particularly when they're putting down petty criminals. The final Dennis Waterman episode was The Wrong Goodbye in 1989. In this episode, Arthur is planning to retire, but his plans are thwarted by a cabal of counsellors and planners who are on the fiddle. Series 7 is notable for Terry's increasing frustration and unhappiness at being part of Arthur's schemes, no doubt aggravated by having to spend some time in prison again due to Arthur's dodgy deals. In episode 3 of Series 7, Terry is offered a job, in spite of Arthur's meddling in the recruitment process. Intriguingly, in true less is more Minder style, the job is forgotten by episode 4. But there is no doubt that the tension and unhappiness is increasing, and Dave the barman also knows that the time is coming for Terry to leave Arthur's employ. As Dennis Waterman leaves the show in 1989, a new version of Minder is conceived, with Arthur Daley as the undisputed central character, and a hitherto unknown family of his brother Bert, sister-in-law Doreen, and, crucially, his nephew Ray. The Series 8 opener is a great piece of TV writing, and David A. Yallop opens the door to the Ray years with the brilliant loneliness of the long-distance entrepreneur. In the difficult world of TV transitions, it is done as well as anyone can expect, and, quite rightly, the action soon gets going with an excellent plot about drugs being smuggled into the UK via cars from the continent. In this episode, we learn that Terry is still working for Arthur off-screen, and Arthur's nephew Ray needs a job. Suddenly, with Dave's connivance, we hear that Terry has got married and has left for Australia in a hurry with his new wife. Now, whether this is just a ruse to make sure that Arthur never follows Terry, or whether it is true, we will never know, although it is portrayed as being actual fact. And with that swift departure, Terry is gone, and Ray, almost by default, becomes Arthur's new minder. Although Ray Daley isn't a slugger like Terry, he is pretty tough and doubly defensive of his Uncle Arthur. The family element brings a new dynamic to the show. There is only one returning character aside from Arthur, and that is, of course, the wonderful Glyn Edwards as Dave, the owner of the Winchester Club, the club being almost a character on its own by now. The police humour comes in the form of Detective Sergeant Morley, a combination of Chisholm and Rycott, and a very successful character in my view. As with any big changeover to an established lineup, musical or TV, the Ray Daley years are endlessly debated by fans. However, Series 8 and 9 in particular are usually very funny. It is a shame there are no further links with past characters from the Terry years, but TV writing is as unsentimental as they come. Some of the episodes, such as Looking for Mr. Goodtime and The Coach That Came In From the Cold, are absolute classics, and far better than some of the middling 1980s episodes when the show was in danger of losing its way. It is only by 1994 and Series 10 that the interest and the budget has decreased to such an extent that the show begins to run out of steam. Although the final episode, The Long Good Thursday, is solid gold and one of the funniest Minder titles out of a lot of very funny titles. All TV formats get tired, and Minder was no exception. However, Minder remains one of the funniest and most memorable dramas in UK TV comedy. Now, I haven't been sponsored for this video, and I am not affiliated with the following website, but I highly recommend minder.org, that is hosted by JNO. It's been online for some 20 years, and it really is a one-stop shop for everything Minder related. And there is a forum as well where you can discuss Minder topics and episodes. As I said, I'm not connected with this site in any way, although I sometimes post on the forum, but it's such a good site, I just wanted to genuinely give it a mention, and I hope you find it really enjoyable. So, Minder, it's on ITV4 in the UK. There is a DVD box set available, and it is probably available on various streaming and catch-up channels. I hope you really enjoy it, as I have. So thank you for watching this episode of Great Western, and maybe one day I'll catch you down the Winchester Club for a drink. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.